Now, Chairman recognizes himself for an opening statement. July 13th was a terrible day for America. We all agree spirited debate, fighting for what you believe in, are part of what makes this country the greatest nation in the world. But the First Amendment and robust political debate are not consistent in any way with violence. What happened in Butler, Pennsylvania was a tragedy that took the life of a good man, Corey Compertor, leaving a wife without a husband and 2 daughters without a father. Others were injured, and of course, former President Trump, by the grace of God, survived the assassination attempt. There are a lot of unanswered questions about the security failures that day, questions about decisions made before the rally, questions about actions during the rally, and questions about statements made after the event concluded. Prior to the rally, why was the president's security detail denied requests for extra resources? Why weren't all the buildings secured? There were a finite number of buildings that needed to be secured. Why wasn't that done? Why was the president allowed to walk out on the stage when there was a suspicious person on the property? During the rally, what exactly happened between 6:09 and 6:14, those critical 5 minutes? We know from briefings from the director and the deputy director at the FBI and other information we've gathered that at 6:09, the shooter was identified on the roof. At 6:10, the counter sniper was notified. Counter sniper teams were notified about the shooter. 6:11, the shooter fired several shots, injuring and killing one person, injuring others. At 6:12, the counter sniper took down the shooter, and at 6:14, President Trump was escorted off the stage by Secret Service agents. We need to know what happened play by play, moment by moment, second by second, the communications that took place, again, during that critical 5 minutes. And then finally, after the rally, why did both the Secret Service and Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, lie to the American people? July 14th, the day after the attack, Secret Service spokesman Anthony Guglielmi said this, quote, "The assertion that a member of the former president's security team requested additional security resources that the U.S. Secret Service or the Department of Homeland Security rebuffed is absolutely false." The next day, Secretary Mayorkas said, "That is an unequivocally false assertion. We had not received any requests for additional security measures that were rebuffed." But 5 days later, top officials repeatedly rejected requests from Donald Trump's security detail for more personnel. And on the 21st of July, the New York Times, confirming what the Washington Post reported, said, quote, "Mr. Guglielmi acknowledged that the Secret Service had turned down requests for additional federal security assets for Mr. Trump's detail." 180-degree change. Why did they initially lie to us in the days after the attack in Pennsylvania? Finally, we hope to learn more today from Director Wray about the shooter, his use of the drone, the explosives that were in his car, how he got on the roof, and a host of other questions. It is our hope that Director Wray's testimony can begin to give answers to the American people about all of these questions and concerns. So, Director, we appreciate you being here, and we trust that you're going to be as transparent with the committee and the country as you possibly can. And I'm sure you understand that a significant portion of the country has a healthy skepticism regarding the FBI's ability to conduct a fair, honest, open, and transparent investigation. And that skepticism is based on what they've witnessed over the past several years. The American people have seen a Biden-Harris Justice Department that can't tell us who planted the pipe bombs on January 6th, that can't tell us who leaked the Dobbs opinion, and that can't tell us who put cocaine at the White House. A Biden-Harris Justice Department who raided President Trump's home, Biden-Harris Justice Department who worked with social media companies to censor Americans, Biden-Harris Justice Department who let the country believe that the Hunter Biden laptop was misinformation when they knew at the time it was authentic, and maybe most importantly, a Biden-Harris Justice Department who retaliated against whistleblowers who came to this committee and spoke to us about these issues. Last week, we sent you 12 questions about what occurred on July 13th. We expect you to answer those questions and the others that I've just outlined. And again, we thank you for being here today and appreciate your willingness to answer the questions that the committee is going to have. Director, let me go back to where Mr. Bishop was. Tell me about the drone. You act like you wanted to fill us in on that. Fill us in.
So we have recovered a drone that the shooter appears to have used. It's being exploited and analyzed by the FBI lab. The drone was recovered in his vehicle. So at the time of the shooting, the drone was in his vehicle with the controller. In addition, our investigation has uncovered.
Do you know what time of day he flew it, and if he flew it on the day of the shot?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So in addition, it appears that around 3:50 p.m., 4 o'clock in that window on the day of the shooting, that the shooter was flying the drone around the area
2 hours.
for about 11 minutes. I want to be clear, but when I say the area, not over the stage and that part of the area itself, but I would say about 200 yards, give or take, away from that. We think, but we do not know. So again, this is one of these things that's qualified because of our ongoing review, that he was live streaming, viewing the footage from that, again, about 11 minutes in around the 3:50, 4 o'clock p.m. range.
2 hours before, he's flying a drone in the vicinity of the route.
About 200 yards away, yes.
Yards. Okay, that's important information. What about the bombs that we've heard about in the shooter's car?
So again, the FBI lab is exploiting those explosive devices.
Yep.
There were, we've recovered 3 devices, 2 in his vehicle and 1 back in his residence.
Are these what you would call, your experts would call sophisticated operations, or this? I don't know. That's what I've been told by people who have some understanding of this area.
Yeah, I think it's. We've seen more sophisticated and less. I would say these are relatively, again, keyword relatively crude devices themselves, but they did have the ability to be detonated remotely. And so to that point, in addition to the 2 devices that we recovered out of his vehicle, there were receivers for those 2 explosive devices with the devices. And then on the shooter himself, when he was killed by law enforcement, he had a transmitter with him. Now, I do want to add one important point here, is at the moment, it looks to us, again, ongoing review, and I can't say that too many times. At a moment, it looks like because of the on-off position on the receivers, that if he had tried to detonate those devices from the roof, it would not have worked. But that doesn't mean the explosives weren't dangerous.
And I'm sure we're going to get into all these subjects a little bit later as well. Tell us what you can about the encrypted platforms we've heard about.
So one of the things that we're drilling into hard with the shooter in an effort to try to learn more about his state of mind, his motive, his ideology, his context, everything else, is to look at all of his devices, any social media accounts he had, et cetera. And one of the things we've learned in finally getting into his phone, which was also a significant technical challenge from an encryption perspective, but in addition, once we got on the phone, it turned out he was using some encrypted messaging applications.
And again, the same question relative to the bombs. Was this pretty sophisticated, or is this is the kind of the norm you see with folks like, similar situation? How would you describe
on this subject, I would say this has unfortunately now become very commonplace, and it's a real challenge for not just the FBI, but state and local law enforcement all over the state.
Tell me exactly the scope of, does the scope of your investigation include what I call that critical 5 minutes from when the 6:09, when this is based, I think, on information you've given to Congress, 6:09 when the shooter's identified on the roof, and 6:14 when President Trump is ultimately escorted off, and all that happens, the shots that take place in between there. Do you have access to the communications that were going on at the time in that critical 5 minutes?
So our investigation, when you say scope, our investigation includes that time frame, although focused again on the shooter himself and his day.
Now, as involved in that, he's obviously involved in that time frame.
Correct, and as part of that, as part of our focus, our investigation of the shooter and the attack, of course, we are interviewing law enforcement from the scene because those are some of the most significant witnesses, and we're obviously getting access to their materials and that kind of thing. And the Secret Service has been fully cooperative.
You have access to the communications that exist there.
That exact question, as I sit here at the moment, I don't know the exact answer to that question, but I know that Secret Service has been cooperative with us.
The Congress would like access to those communications as well. I mean, not just that 5 minutes, although I think that's the critical time frame. There's lots of communications we'd love to have access as well. Director, that's an important question, though, because you've talked to the counter sniper, and that, I mentioned this in our opening statement, that critical 5 minutes from 6:09 to 6:14, and what takes place there is critical, and I think that's what the gentleman was getting at, and we were hopeful that you could tell us something about your interview with the counter sniper.
Yeah, I guess I want to distinguish a couple things. There is some individual, not law enforcement, I believe, who spotted the shooter on the roof a few minutes before, but I think law enforcement spotting him with the weapon on the roof is seconds before the shot.
Okay,
So
that's important.
yeah,
'cause
so I think there's two different things.
I think what you're saying
there.
is it wasn't maybe that if the bad guy shoots at 6:11, then you're saying this encounter with local law enforcement that Mr. Bentz was just getting into happened just seconds before that and maybe not 2 minutes before that?
That's my understanding. That, in other words, that there's different things here. There's an individual, at least one individual I can think of, not law enforcement, member of the public, who observed him on the roof. Not clear whether or not the individual saw a weapon or not, but saw him in a way that was concerning. That is some number of, not many, but like just a handful of minutes. I think separate from that, as far as law enforcement goes, in terms of a weapon, this local officer that we just talked about observed the individual, again, literally just seconds before the shooter took his shots. Separate and apart from all of that, roughly, I think, maybe a little less than or around an hour before the shooting, there were local law enforcement officers who observed the shooter, not up on the roof, not with a weapon, but with I believe, a rangefinder, kind of like you would use if you were playing golf or something, in a way that was odd and suspicious. So that started happening with local law enforcement beforehand. But in terms of shooter, meaning with the weapon, law enforcement, my understanding is that the first time that happened was this local officer climbing up on the roof seconds before the shooting.
Again, we want that timeline. I think the committee wants that timeline and communications that were taking place in that short period of time.
Again, as I've said with everything else, I really want to be careful. I'm leaning in, trying to share as much as I can here. Facts are evolving, things may change, but we are working on a timeline, among other things.
I guess I'm not clear exactly where you said there were 8 shell casings on the roof, so 8 bullets were fired. We obviously know that Mr. Compratore lost his life. Two other rally goers were injured, seriously injured, and then the one that hit President Trump. Does that account for, were some of these individuals hit multiple times? Where did all 8 bullets go, is I guess my question.
I don't have that in front of me. I'm happy to circle back and get that to you. It's assuming we have that information yet. As I said, I think with respect to former President Trump, there's some question about whether or not it's a bullet or shrapnel that hit his ear. So it's conceivable. Although, as I sit here right now, I don't know whether that bullet, in addition to causing the grazing, could have also landed somewhere else. But I believe we've accounted for all of the shots and the cartridges. So let us get that.
And it's my understanding that the very first one was the one that hit the president. Is that the very first shot, or is that not accurate?
I don't, as I sit here right now, I don't know the answer to that. I believe we know the answer to that. I just don't have it in front of me.
Okay. Is there any chance I mean, it seems to me that this bad guy, this shooter, was focused on President Trump, but you indicated that he purchased 50 rounds of ammunition, I believe, earlier that day. Do you have any indications thus far in your investigation that in addition to going after and trying to assassinate the former president, he was also looking to do a lot more damage to other individuals?
That's a hard question to answer. What I would say is I agree with you that his preparatory activity is what we've seen so far, the limited information that has been relevant and interesting about his preparatory activity does seem to be that he had settled on former President Trump as a target and this rally as his moment to try to take a shot. But in addition to the 50 rounds, of course, you have the issue of these explosive devices.
Right.
And so what else he may have had in mind is something that I think is very much of an open question. On the one hand, you have these explosive devices, including the one still back in his home, that wasn't in quite the same stage as the one in the the ones in the vehicle. But he clearly had those explosive devices for some reason. And so we're trying to figure that out. As I've said before, you know, sometimes in these kind of situations, you find like a manifesto or something like that. It's frustrating to us, and I'm sure frustrating to you and the American people, that we haven't found anything quite like that. We'd love to have a roadmap that tells us exactly what he was thinking. We haven't found that yet. Doesn't mean we won't. We're looking all over the place, and we're going to leave no stone unturned.
Thank you. Director, I'm still not clear in my mind. When did the counter snipers, the good guys, when did they first get eyes on the bad guy, the would-be assassin, on the roof of the AGR building?
I'm not certain, but I'll take my best effort here.
I guess I'm sorry to interrupt, but did they have eyes on him before the local law enforcement was looking up on the roof and engaged with the bad guy shooter?
I don't know the answer to that. I will look into that and get back to you. I believe we have the answer. I just don't know that I have it. I want to make sure I answer accurately.
Because we thought, from the briefings that Mr. Abbott gave us, or Bate gave us, excuse me, Abate gave us, and the briefings you gave the Congress, that they did, but it wasn't clear from your testimony. So if you can get that answer to us, that would be helpful. I want to circle back just a third time, if I could, to the Iranian threat to President Trump and some others, former members of our government. The reason I want to go back to that, because we now know that the Secret Service and Homeland Security denied resources to President Trump's detail that they had asked for. And it seems to me, if that all happened after you guys knew about the Iran threat and had briefed the Secret Service on that real threat, that's an even bigger problem. And that's why I was trying to get that timeline down, when you knew about it and when you briefed the Secret Service on the Iranians' threat to kill President Trump.
So again, I really want to be careful to both be accurate, but also not to kind of stray into any kind of classified information or confirm the existence of classified information. So let me see if there's a way for us to get back to you on that question. I understand why you're asking. It may be easier to answer than I think, but at the moment in an open hearing, I'm not sure if I can see the right way to do that.
Fair enough. We'll expect answers to both those questions, and you can get back to this. That'd be great. Finally, anything else you want to tell us that we didn't ask? I mean, you came today and you told us some things that weren't even prompted by questions, and I just want to make sure if there's anything else you want to tell us regarding July 13th and what you've discovered. You know, now's the time.
Well, again, we're going to continue to engage with the Congress. I think we've covered a lot of the points that I really wanted to make sure that I got across, and just as I'm looking at my list, in one way or another through the course of today's questioning, I think we've gotten through most of it.
That concludes today's hearing. We thank our witness for appearing before the committee today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.